Hello, and welcome to His Purpose Prevails. My name is Pam. The name of this podcast comes from the Bible verse Proverbs 19:21 that states, "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." The reason I chose this name is because of my many life experiences and the many hats that I wear. This podcast is an integration of all parts of me. I am a Christian, I am Hmong, I am a woman, I am a mental health therapist, a wife, a daughter, and so much more. The topics that I speak on will be related to these different parts of me and may be relatable to you as well. I invite you to join me as I and other speakers share our experiences, offer wisdom, messages of hope, or just a different perspective. I found that it does not matter what hat I wear, what I do, what hardship comes my way, the Lord can use it to give my life purpose. And in the end, it is His purpose that prevails. Let's get into the podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Today, I have a super special guest. This is my dear beloved friend, Yolanda. And before we welcome her, I just kind of want to tell everybody how we met. So, she and I actually met, I think it was in my first or second year of graduate school. So, she and I attended the same graduate program. We are both licensed marriage and family therapists. And I would say Yolanda was one of the first people that I really felt comfortable just being me and learning to be me. In graduate school, I did my own therapy. And so what I learned from that is that I had something called internalized racism. So if you don't know what that is, go ahead and look it up. But Yolanda was really the one who was, she would point out like microaggressions, and we could talk about racism, and we could talk about privilege and things like that. And so immediately I felt very safe with Yolanda. But today I have asked her to come on because I think she has a wealth of knowledge that we can all glean from. I've always admired her. I think she's super intelligent. And so it's really my pleasure and honor to have her on today. So let us all just give her a warm welcome.
Oh, thank you, Pam. That is really sweet. Yes, I feel really fortunate to have met you in grad school. And just to be able to experience a lot of those things together. But yes, definitely one of my dearest friends too.
Thank you again so much for being on today. So today, one of the reasons why I started this podcast is really to amplify voices of BIPOC, right? BIPOC women, men, just different experiences from our own, because I think a lot of it is really relatable. And so, Yolanda, you and I, we have similarities within our culture, with the way we see things, do things. Maybe emotions aren't always felt or talked about. And so I think a lot of the things we're going to talk about is going to be relatable to the viewers, but definitely the Latino perspective. I really want to emphasize that today. So again, thank you so much for being on. But before we get started, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, as you said, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I recently opened my own practice this past summer, and so that was exciting and scary. I'm a mom of two boys. My youngest is on the spectrum, and we can definitely talk about that if you would like, but that's actually how I got started on this mental health journey. And my husband's a retired military, he's a veteran, he's been deployed a couple times, and yeah, I don't know what else I should share. I have two dogs. They're awesome. They're not in here, otherwise you would hear them snoring.
They are awesome. Yes, thank you so much for that introduction. So yeah, you said something about your mental health journey. Tell us a little bit about that because I'm curious as to, what made you take the licensed marriage and family therapy track? Because other people can do like LPC, LCSW, but tell us
Mhm.
more about that.
Yeah, so one thing I was gonna say was, so I'm an immigrant. I immigrated to this country when I was five, but I really have grown up here. And as someone that dealt with my own, experiences with racism. I actually initially wanted to be an attorney. I don't think where I'm at now I could ever do that, but that's initially what I wanted to do, and really work with underserved communities. And then that shifted into, I realized pretty quickly, like, this is not where my heart is. And then I shifted into social work again with this like really mindset of wanting to work with these underserved communities. But then I had to take a break from college because I had my kids, and we were pretty young, and so I actually had to work a lot. And then when I did return to college to wrap up as an adult, I was still doing social work, and then I had a professor who was an LMFT, and she, as we were talking, she asked me, she said, "Would you ever consider this?" Because I think I was sharing with her what I was really wanting to do, and she was saying social work may not be really, you're not going to end up getting what you're looking for. And so when that happened, I started looking more into therapy, becoming a therapist. I ended up getting a job as a facilitator for a rap program, and I really got to work with therapists, with the families, and I'm like, this is where my heart is. And so when I ended up graduating, I knew that I would be going to grad school to pursue becoming a therapist.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. I don't think I ever heard that before, so that's a first for me. I love that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a conversion because a lot of things too where my professor and I started talking was because so my youngest son, Alex, we knew there was something going on with him.
Mm,
But in my family, again, we're immigrants and we didn't know anything about autism. We didn't really know anything about mental health, but so we knew there was something going on. And so I started doing my own homework and my own research. And when he did finally get diagnosed, and he had just turned 9 when he got diagnosed, I had been advocating for him since he was 3. And so I started working with him and teaching him. We had to teach him what emotions were. We had to develop that emotional language for him. And that was what I ended up sharing with that one professor. And that's when she was telling me this is maybe where you want to go, because she was seeing how it impacted us, impacted my family. I had to then almost educate my family about mental health, letting them know that this isn't something that just goes away. Like there was this kind of
mhm,
misunderstanding that autism just went away. And so again, like I really think that we're dealt what we're dealt for a reason. And
mhm.
it is challenging, of course, having one son who is neurotypical and then another one who's neurodivergent. But I really feel that without my Alex, I may not have been down this road.
Wow. And so you were advocating him. One thing y'all need to know about Yolanda is she is a fierce advocate, but I hear that you were advocating for him since he was 3 because you were like, okay, as a maybe the mother intuition of like something's off or just, there's something different and there's something that needs to be addressed. So, yeah.
So I was really young when I had him. I had to be like 22 or 23. I can't remember. I should remember, but I don't. But I had him fairly young, and then I had my older son even younger. And so again, we were trying to figure, my husband and I are trying to figure these things out. And I had told his doctor, he's 3, he's not talking. It was really difficult to potty train him. He needed things to follow a schedule, to just be really, really structured. And so I told him, I really think he has autism. And the doctor said, no, he just has a lazy tongue, and sent him to speech pathology, which was, of course, so beneficial. By the time he was 4, he was talking. And then, of course, my husband and I both learned how to help him, how to weigh, etc. But I do feel that I was dismissed because, partially because of my race, because I wasn't this, maybe I was perceived as this uneducated young Latina who just had another baby. So that's where I'm saying, like, I had to do a lot of this work myself to,
Mm,
after he did speech pathology, to continue to advocate for him. By the time he finished, he was 4. But again, we're looking at almost 5 years uh,
right.
where I asked for help at his schools, and no, I was just told he's fine. Actually, I was told he
Okay.
was bad, is what I was told.
He was bad.
Yeah.
And that's the stigma surrounding anything different than what society would deem normal, right? Is there's all these negative labels that go with it. So I don't know that this matters, but I think I'm curious personally, was his pediatrician or the people that surrounded you who you were asking for help, were these white folks? Were these, yeah.
Yeah. was an older white doctor, he was very old. And the reason I say I do believe it had to do with how he perceived me as this uneducated, brown person, was because with my older son, he had said, don't be giving him any of those Mexican remedies that you guys do. I think I had brought him in because he was sick. And oftentimes, like in my, I don't want to speak for all Mexicans, but, primarily in the Latino culture, we use a lot of, herbs and just more of a, I can't think of that word, but what's like that homeopathic approach, a holistic
Mm-hmm.
approach. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing I grew up on was my mom would always say, let's drink a tea, or let's use, vapuru, like the vapor rub, or let's use all these things. And I had told the doctor that, and he was like, no, don't be giving him none of those Mexican things, those Mexican remedies. And again,
Wow.
I was young. And so I didn't know. And I was like, okay, I guess we're not supposed to do these. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
I didn't have extended family to ask, because when we immigrated, it was just literally my family of origin. And so, it's
Okay.
like a blind leading the blind here, trying to figure things out.
Right. Well, and I think the reason I asked too is just I wanted to know basically like the doctor's age group if they were white because what would be interesting to me is what is their knowledge on autism? Like maybe they're not even well versed on autism or maybe because I know people I would say some people would think people who speak a second language they're slower, they're dumb, but it's not. It's just because they don't know your language. So having a different language doesn't equal a disability, right? But
Mhm.
for this doctor, he was saying, "Oh no." So I'm wondering if he was thinking, I don't know what he was thinking. Obviously, he thought there was a language issue and
Yeah.
referred him to a speech pathologist, or is that what it's called, a speech pathologist?
Yeah, speech
Yeah.
pathologist. She was so amazing. She was so great with him. But I agree. I do think that he may have thought it was, um, just the language thing. I know with our older son, he had a harder time also talking. And the doctor told us we were teaching him Spanish and English, and he told us you need to pick one. And so we did. We ended up just teaching him English. And of course, that made it easier for him. But I wonder what my experience would have been like if I had had a doctor of color, if I had
Mhm.
had another, just like a non-white doctor that may have understood, or a bilingual doctor that may have understood, how we can make things work instead of just making this assumption. Because, now, obviously, like 20 years later, when I think about
Mhm.
this, I think that is such a microaggression to
Mhm.
just pick a language.
It
Um,
is.
instead of encouraging me or trying to collaborate with me to figure different things out. Yeah.
Yeah. I share a similar experience because I grew up speaking English, and so my Hmong was very rusty. But when I married my husband, they spoke a lot of Hmong, and even though so I think he came over to the U.S. from um, the Thai refugee camps when he was like 3 months old, so he was an infant. So he literally grew up here,
Mhm.
but they spoke a lot of Hmong in his family, and so when he went to school he had a really hard time learning due to other things as well. But so when we got married, because I was around his family, I spoke more Hmong, and so my I eventually brushed up on my Hmong. But we took my oldest to the doctor, and she was speaking a lot of Hmong, and so but her test scores at school were lower, and our doctor actually did say, "No, I think it's great that you're teaching her Hmong.
Mhm.
She will appear slower because her vocabularies like the number of words in her vocabulary are a lot larger than most, but she will catch up eventually, right? And so for me, I was okay with that, but I think because of how my husband struggled, he was like, no, she doesn't need to learn Hmong. Like the main language here is English, and he really wanted her to speak English. So of all my children, my oldest Holly, she probably understands the most Hmong and she can speak a little bit of it, but she has self-taught herself other languages, so she really enjoys other languages. But my younger two, they don't speak Hmong. And they've said to me, like, Mom, why didn't you teach us Hmong? But I think my husband had such a bad experience in school and feeling like someone that came from him primarily speaking Hmong that he didn't want to teach Hmong to our kids. So,
Yeah. Hmm. I do get that from my boys too. Well, mainly my oldest, he says, I wish I would have um grown up speaking Spanish. And
mhm,
I told him, you're right. And I wish you would have too. But again, it's just an experience we had.
right. Yeah. All right. So one of the questions I had for you is what is your personal experience with therapy?
So therapy was this foreign thing. To be honest, I don't even think I knew about therapy until probably when I went back to school in college, which sounds strange, but it just wasn't in our world. I didn't actually start therapy until was it my third or it was in 2020. So, it must have been my third year in grad school. So, well, you know this, but we had that one professor who was like, you have to have therapy. And
Yes.
in retrospect, I'm very grateful. I am very grateful for it. I do feel like it had such a positive impact on my life personally, but also professionally. So I am really grateful for that. But it was so scary. I went through my insurance at first, and but the insurance that I went through, they have more of a like a crisis model, more like short-term therapy, like brief
Mhm.
therapy. So they literally saw me once a month until I there was a period that was really difficult for me, and then they upped it to twice a month. And the minute
Wow.
I started getting better, I got the boot. And it is what it is. But it was really scary. But when I started with my therapist that I still have now, she's private pay, that was a game changer. And it was really, really hard. Um, but the way I really describe it for myself and even to my clients now is like I came in and I was this mason jar and I was just overflowing. And so there really
Mhm.
wasn't room for anything. I was in this constant like overflow crisis mode almost. And the therapist, I feel like in that room allowed me to, maybe for the first month, we just took out like a quarter of a teaspoon of water. And maybe
Mhm.
month we jumped it up to a whole teaspoon. But the point is that after being there for a couple months, I felt like I could breathe. I felt like I could think, and I was able to really get in touch with my emotions. Yeah, it's genuine I mean, it's genuinely been life-changing for me.
Thank you for sharing that. And I don't think there's any shame or anything like that from learning about therapy later because you're right. In our culture, there's so many different things we do culturally where we've learned how to ask for help or what help looks like, right? And a lot of that is just internalizing it ourselves. So yeah, I would say similarly, my first time in therapy was back in 2000, I think it was 14 or 15. I think 2015. And I was literally bursting at the seam. And I think I had never thought to go to therapy because I always had my older sister, and she was just a really good outlet and sounding board. And, we would bounce ideas off each other, and she would tell me her thoughts and give me advice and feedback. But because our brother died,
Mhm.
it was hard to go to her because we were having our own grief, right? And so it was something that impacted both of us. So then that's why I sought out a therapist. And I just remember, and a lot of my clients do this too, but I just remember like, hurry up, let's get through all the informed consent so that I can tell you why I'm here because I need to talk, right? I've been internalizing for so long. But I get that with a lot of clients too. I find myself a little bit rushing because they're like about to cry, and I'm like, this is so boring, and I just have to do this, but I promise the rest of the sessions are yours. So yeah, we're not taught to go to therapy.
And then I think also thinking culturally, I feel like because we're such a collectivist culture that we're used to turning to each other. My experience in particular was different again because I didn't have extended family here, and there were just six of us. That's including my parents. And there were so many mental health issues that we really there wasn't really space to turn into each other. And because we I grew up and I was undocumented for the majority of my life, we were not allowed to, we were kind of given the message that what we talk about stays at home. And I do think it's fair to say that that message is oftentimes in communities of color, that whether it's due to shame, we don't want to or we don't want people to know our business, or whatever it is. So that was a big thing, is we couldn't tell people. And I have an older stepbrother, but he left when I was pretty young. And so I ended up, I grew up being the oldest really. And so having to carry a lot of that too was so hard. So even when I started therapy and I started sharing some of my experiences, I was one of those chronic apologizers, like, I'm sorry for crying. I'm sorry for telling you this. And
Mhm.
it that's where I say like my therapy was life changing, because I had to really unlearn so many of these messages just to be in a place where I can say, oh, I am allowed to cry and my feelings are valid. And I don't
Right,
have to apologize for just being myself.
right. I have so many clients that apologize, and I'm like, no, don't. Like, there's like, what are you apologizing for? You're not doing anything wrong. But you're right. Sometimes we think going to therapy and talking about our problems or our family members can feel wrong, or we feel like we're being disloyal. So there's a lot of different mixed emotions that goes along with that. I would say though, so my first therapist was white. She was great, but I think I just really needed somebody to listen. I think there was helpful, like she was a good sounding board. She would give me advice here and there. And then the therapist that I had in graduate school, she was a professor. She had her PhD, so she was a psychologist. And she and we did very well. I was very intentional about doing therapy. And I felt like I was outgrowing her, and she would do check-ins. And at this time, I'm like learning about myself. I'm learning how to feel. I'm learning to give words to what I'm feeling. And there were other times where she would check in with me, and I wish I would have been honest with her, but I think I told you personally, Yolanda, like I felt like I outgrew her.
Mhm.
And it's not that she wasn't great. I just felt like I was talking in circles, and I felt like she brought me to a really far place, but that's kind of where we stayed, right? So then I stopped working with her, and I actually found a monk therapist. And it was when I was transitioning, so I was actually moving back because I made that decision very abruptly to move back to central Wisconsin. And I wish I would have had more time with this therapist. And I think a lot of people look for people who are either bilingual and or understand their culture because they don't want to spend like 5 sessions giving historical information, giving like cultures and traditions and beliefs and values. But yeah, I think it's so important for people who really have that they really have that desire to work with somebody who looks like them, who understands them, who speaks their language or understands their culture. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was a non-negotiable for me. Was so I had gone, like I said, through my insurance, and the therapist with the insurance, she was great. She was so sweet. It was just, and I feel like she was helpful, but it's just their model. You know what I mean? And it didn't fit me because I really needed long term so that I can process certain things.
Right.
Um, but so when I decided to find that long-term therapist, I knew that she needed to be Mexican. This was very
Mhm.
important to me. I needed someone that looked like me. I would
Mhm.
have preferred if she was bilingual, but she wasn't. And honestly, at that point, like it was okay. And I
Mhm.
was grateful she called me back. We ended up playing phone tag a couple times. Um, but you're right. I didn't want to have to explain to someone why I felt this way, or explain how these cultural factors, created barriers, or things like that. And I feel like it was really helpful. It just felt, it helped me. I think it helped my body, to be honest, feel more at ease with someone that looked like me because she felt like a safer body than someone that.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up that point. I think that's really important. I always tell my clients, you should know by at least the third session if we're going to be a good fit. And I tell people who are seeking therapy services that relationship with your client or with your therapist is so important. You need to feel like they understand you. You need to feel like they're listening, they can empathize, they're compassionate, right? Otherwise, you just kind of have a wall up. And I'm not saying you can't do any work, but I think it's you do the best work when you can trust that person across from you.
Yeah, I mean, if we really think about it, we're these strangers and these clients are coming in and they're sharing these, maybe some wonderful things, but oftentimes it's some of the most difficult times in their lives with
Mhm.
this person that started off as a stranger. So you're right, they really need to be able to be in a place where they can trust us, and that's so the walls can come down, and that's when the work starts.
Right, right. And in addition to talking to complete strangers, I think sometimes that can be a benefit because sometimes people are so used to talking with friends and family members, and these friends and family members are telling you what you want to hear, or maybe they're lecturing you and you're not trying to get lectured. So it can be really helpful to talk to a complete stranger. And I think, of course, we're biased because we're therapists, but I think everyone can benefit from therapy, right? Even therapists need therapists. And you and I, we both have done therapy before. So,
Yeah, yes, I'm a big fan of therapists, seeing therapists. Our jobs are they're so wonderful and we love them or we wouldn't be in this field.
hmm
But there are days, well, I'm sure this happens to you, Pam, where you're just emotionally beat up. Uh,
hmm
I know I had a day like that not too long ago and it was rough. Uh,
hmm
so yes, we definitely need our own space to process too.
Yes, I agree. All right. So I wanted to ask, what are some cultural nuances that you see within the Hispanic community, or Latino community? And you can take that however you mean, like whatever you want to share with us. So
Can you tell me more? Like, what do you mean?
yeah, so like for example, in the monk community, some cultural nuances, right? Maybe there's patriarchy or people don't believe in mental health or, if their family members on the spectrum, sometimes they don't get them seen, right? Because of the stigma or they just think, oh, they're just slower, but there's nothing wrong with them because they don't look different, right? Like with Down syndrome and other disorders, you can tell that there's something different. But so wherever you want to take that, like what are specific cultural nuances that you see within the Latina community?
Yeah, I think definitely some patriarchy there. The word as you were explaining it that came to mind is a lot of machismo. Um,
hmm
right? So that kind of reminds me of I feel like as things are turning, especially with this younger generation, and there are more Latinos, and also I use the term Latinos, and it's no disrespect to anyone that wants to use the term Latinx. It's just what feels natural to me, so that's the term I'm going to use. But as I see this younger Latino generation, it feels like more people are more open to therapy, but I almost can feel like it started maybe with more females because there's still this machismo where men are supposed to be really tough and they're supposed to be emotionless and they're just almost, the only emotion that's really, I would say, mostly accepted for men is anger. You could
hmm
be angry, or if you're sad, okay, well, you can be angry, or you're frustrated, okay, you can be angry, but you're not really allowed to feel sadness and I would say in what, people perceive as like sadness, like crying or feeling down or anything like that. Or there's a lot of separating from emotions, growing up, one thing that and I some of my Latina friends and I joke around, whereas if you would cry, there'd be the I'll give you something to cry about. So
Yeah.
you learn to not cry, you learn to internalize. So I think there's almost a lot of you need to be seen and not necessarily heard. And
Mm,
I would say and this is just again a generalization, but I feel that oftentimes the one thing we're not taught are emotions.
hmm
Oh, I work with a lot of Latina and clients, like adult clients, and they'll often come in and they'll say, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I want to be able to identify emotions, but other than the basic like angry, sad, you know, anxious, they don't understand that there's so many more other emotions. So I don't know if that makes sense. I kind of like went off.
No, that you led us right into the next question is like, why do you think people don't want to feel or can't feel? Because I've had people say that too. Like, how do I feel? How am I supposed to process? And we do that together in session, but they're so detached or disconnected. And you're right, they feel the big emotions, or they feel like they can say they're afraid, or they can say they're sad, they're angry, right? Happy, but they don't, all those vulnerable and other emotions, they don't really have the names to them. So I have the emotion wheel that you got for me, and it's in my office, and I will hand it. And at first, my adult clients are kind of like, oh, but then they really like it because then they can find other words. It's helpful when they're listed there because they're like, oh, yeah, that's what I'm feeling. So I often, and even with my telehealth clients, we will pull up the emotion wheel. So thank you for that. And it's been a great tool for them.
Yeah, yeah, you're welcome. So I have an emotion wheel too. And
Yeah.
um I don't pull it out right away. I used to, and I noticed clients would be like, what the heck is this? Like they would be so overwhelmed. So, but going back to your earlier question, I'll come back to the emotion wheel. I definitely feel that our clients oftentimes, depending on their childhood experiences or just whatever experience, it's not safe to feel emotions because it's really hard and scary, right? Who
hmm
wants to go around feeling sad all the time or nervous all the time, or scared out of their mind? And, depending on how they grew up, some of that stays they almost learn to like disassociate from it, right? Because their body is just saying this is way too much. I can't deal with it anymore. And so I feel like the clients that I work with now, and I would say even like older teens, like, 16, 17, but a lot of the
hmm
adults, they say, well, I can't really feel this emotion. And so what I do to help them start to close that gap is I tell them, where do you feel it in your body? And that's where I start. And because our body doesn't lie, I tell them our body rats us out, you know,
Yeah.
uh, they're feeling something. They may have this like stone cold face. And so I'll just
hmm
look at them and I'm like, I'm wondering where you're feeling that right now. And so that's where I'm able to help them connect because even as kids as we were younger, if we're in these experiences where maybe there was domestic violence or there was just it could have just been as something as just having parents that were dysregulated all the time, right? So there was maybe this constant chaos, there's constant noise. Their body's gonna remember that, but their body may have said this is no longer safe for us, so we need to detach. We're not gonna focus and try to feel this. We're gonna run away from this.
For sure. And if you think about never having felt your feelings fully before, it is scary, and it also makes people feel like they don't have control. And so I remember with one client, he was starting to feel, and he had tears coming out of his eyes, but he was kind of like put off by it. And he was like, I don't know what's happening right now. And yeah, he was really put off by it. And he felt out of control. And so sometimes when we're starting to process, and I think I've been working with a lot of clients just this past week on that, is I'm like, what do you do when you feel out of control?
Hmm.
And they'll say, oh, I'll go clean, or I'll do this and I'll do that, or I'll make a list, or I'll call, or I'll play games, or I'll scroll on my phone. So they're either attempting to gain control in another part of their life, like cleaning, or they dissociate, like you say, like you just said, right? And then they'll scroll or do something like that. So no, I really like that you add that body component to it.
Yeah, and to go along with what you said about, I totally agree. They're feeling out of control. So then that obviously increases their anxiety. But I also think, I shouldn't just assume, but I also really do believe that clients feel shame for then feeling these emotions, especially when they do have these big emotions and when they allow themselves, when they feel safe enough to cry because
Hmm.
there was likely off, that message of why are you crying? Stop crying. Crying is bad. Crying makes you stop being a baby. I've noticed that a lot of clients apologize and then feel like they're doing something wrong if
Hmm.
they get in touch with their emotions.
Right. Okay, go back to what you're gonna say about the emotion wheel because I want to hear it.
No, so I was just gonna say after I help them identify where they feel these sensations in their body, we'll start helping them connect some feelings. And then when we're really ready, I get a little dry because I laminated mine. So I get a dry
Mhm.
erase marker and I give it to them. And then when we're talking about something, I'll say, oh, I hear you say you feel, anxious or scared or whatever. Um, I'm going to show this to you, and I wonder if there are other emotions that you might feel that maybe you just don't know yet. And most of the time, they're just like, whoa, but they're able to select many of them. And some of
Mhm.
them might tell me, oh, do I have to stay in this like little, because it's a circle and then a little pie chart. They're like, do I have
Yep.
to stay in this little pie? And I'm like, nope. I'm like, we tend to feel multiple emotions at once. And so you can select all the ones that you feel. And I noticed that and the reason I have them select it with the dry eraser, they either put like a dot or a circle. Some clients cross them out. And I think that itself is telling. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I have them then reflect on it and look at it. And I notice most of the time the clients are amazed by how many emotions they really are experiencing that they didn't realize they were.
Mm-hmm.
I I feel like it's so beneficial for the clients and I feel like it validates that they're allowed to have and experience all of these emotions, that they're not just limited to these like sadness, happy, angry.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's so helpful that you can unpack it with them and that they can visually see. I just had a session with one of my clients this past week and they were sharing about crying about a situation. And so I said, okay, let's unpack that. And originally, when they said they cried, I think there was some embarrassment or shame about crying, or they were like, I don't even know why I cried. It wasn't even that big of a deal, right? But when we unpacked their day, they were like, wow. I didn't even know how far back this started
Hmm.
because this was like the first emotion, the second emotion, the third, and things kept piling and things build, right? And there's so many layers. And then it was like the final straw, even if it's just like as light as a feather and everything topples over and you have to release it somehow. And so then they cried, but they were able to say, wow. And so I said, yes, look at what you were going through beginning from here. Who knows if you were carrying things from the prior day or the prior weeks, right? Or what you're carrying, subconsciously or unconsciously. And so I think for that person, unpacking that really helped them to see, and to, like you said, give, like, I'm allowed to cry. I'm allowed to have feelings. And when people cry, they really do feel so, I don't know, they think it's like a sign of weakness, but there was something, a meme or a quote that I saw on Facebook that said, crying isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign you're alive. And there was like this newborn baby that had just been born. And generally when newborns are born, the doctors like will spank them or, to get them to cry, right? To get them to take a breath of air now that they're on the outside of the womb, right? And so yeah, crying is a sign that we're alive. And I love that quote because anyone can cry. Everyone cries, right? I tell my clients, like, Jesus wept. We cry. We have emotions. So,
I love that. I'm definitely going to be using that with my clients. What I tell my clients, because I have some clients where they're in a place now where they can cry freely and they feel safe enough to do so. And I genuinely just feel so happy for them that they don't feel like they have to hide that part of themselves. And so
Mhm.
I do with my other clients that are still on this journey to feel safe enough to cry when they do, I just remind them like how courageous they are, that they allowed this part of themselves that they work so hard to hide to show up, and that
Yeah.
they're courageous enough to say, I'm going to feel and I'm going to sit with this emotion, because that is not easy. I know I was one of those people that didn't cry. I was one of those people that apologized excessively for crying, or definitely felt like I was this weak person for crying. And now I'm just like, oh, you know, it's such a release.
Mhm.
But again, for my clients, I really feel like it's really courageous that they are allowing themselves to really feel all of their parts instead of trying to hide that part away.
Yeah, because it takes energy to repress and suppress a part of us too, right? And for them to be able to be vulnerable or to be able to let that part out or to, you know, quotation mark show weakness, right? And a quotation mark, not that they're weak, but that's what they feel. Yeah. And so society, we have to let people cry without judgment. Like we need to be okay with people crying. And I think I've shared this a few times in different episodes, but yeah, I remember crying and my mom would say, "Sakoko," which means stop crying. But I didn't know if it was like endearment of like, don't cry, I love you. It hurts me to see you sad, or if it was just like, you're a nuisance, shut it up, right? Or quiet. And then I realized I started doing that to my girls. And then when they would cry, I would be like, stop crying. And then when I did my own therapy, I'm like, oh, that's my view of crying. I'm not okay with me crying, but I'm now doing this to my children. And this is like continuing that generational trauma, right? So then once I worked on myself, I was able to hold the space for my children to cry. And I wouldn't tell them to stop crying. I would say, it's okay to cry. Or, you're feeling really sad or you're feeling big emotions right now. And yeah, we've got to let people cry.
Mhm.
It's a way to bring relief, or it gives us that release. There's actually a study by Harvard that says it's beneficial to cry. Like it's cleansing when you cry, it releases like toxins and depression hormones and all of those things. So I'm gonna stand by it. People, it's okay to cry.
I have some clients that are really logical. Uh,
Hmm.
so they tend to prefer things that are like evidence-based or studied. And I remember one time I had a client that was like, crying is a waste of time. It doesn't change anything. There was really like a lot of negative messages that they had received around crying. And so I told them, okay, well, you tend to like studies and you like evidence and things of that sort. And so I had told them that, and I was like, I think it's even like great for your eyes, because of the tears and whatnot. And yeah, sometimes you have to use that logic to get
Right.
past some of those barriers.
Yeah. And some people they say like I hate crying. Every time they cry and I tell them it's okay to cry, they still hate it. And I think it's how they feel. Um, but it's like I'm not judging you. I'm not here to judge you. And yes, you might feel terrible in the moment but you're feeling your emotions, right? And then hopefully afterward, yeah, you have like a stuffy nose and puffy eyes, but you do feel better, right? You're alleviating some of that emotional cup. So
Yeah. Me being me, I would probably tell my clients, well, you don't have to like it, but can we still allow it to happen?
you would say that. I love that.
Let's just sit with the emotion.
Yeah. No, that I mean you're letting them be them. They don't like it, but yeah, so that's so good. Okay. The next question I have is what advice or tips would you give to people starting their mental health journey and or therapy?
Um, that's a good one. Don't give up. I think I'm going to say that right away. Um, the reason I say that is because, again, from my experience, my first therapist, it just wasn't a fit, and that was okay, right? And it took me a while. Like it wasn't like after I stopped seeing her, I immediately went and found my therapist now. I took a break, or sometimes I wouldn't even go to the sessions, because it was scary. But
Mhm.
I didn't give up, and eventually I did find the therapist that was such a great fit for me. And another one would be to don't be afraid to ask for help, which I know can be really challenging, and I mean that because again, thinking culturally, that often happens where there's this like I should be able to do it myself. Oh, also should is my least favorite word in the world.
Mhm.
Um, but if possible, I would definitely say ask for help, even if you do
Mhm.
it anonymously, right? You could do it through chats, you could do it through social media, but you could just find people who have that experience. And when you do meet with your therapist, I think going back to what you said, after give it a couple sessions, don't give up. Give it a couple sessions. If after that first month, right? So that puts you at about 3, 4 weeks you're going to know if it's a fit or if it's not a fit.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's okay if it's not a fit. It's okay. But don't give up on yourself because I, I would definitely tell somebody you are so worth it. You are worth the investment of time financially, but not just you are worth this investment, but the generations that are going to follow you are going to be worth this investment.
I love that. You're absolutely right. Sometimes my clients will come in and they'll tell me horror stories of experiences with therapy and our therapist. And I will tell them, you're so brave. Thank you for giving it another shot. Like you had every reason in the book not to come back. And here you are. Like that's such a big step. And I've even had my own. I mean, I shared with you my recent experience, right, with a therapist. So it happens. Just because I'm a therapist, I'm not gonna think that every therapist is great. I hope that they are, but yeah, there are just some therapists that do things differently and find the right one for you. Don't give up. I love that.
Yeah, I would even add like be picky, be
Mm-hmm.
selective. This is a person that you're going to share some really deep stuff with. So it's okay. Like I said, my non-negotiable was my therapist had to be Mexican. She had to look like me. Then
Mm-hmm.
I would prefer again bilingual, but that wasn't a deal breaker, but she had to look like me. And so it's okay to be picky, you know?
I was gonna ask like what's helpful and what isn't helpful in supporting clients of color, but I don't know if our because we're not speaking to therapists, so do you think that's relevant?
If you want, what if we focused on just what is helpful?
What is helpful in supporting clients of color?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. What have you got?
Okay, so um I what I have found being the most helpful in working with clients of color is normalizing their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Normalizing one coming to therapy and stating how courageous that is, normalizing that it can feel weird or awkward or that they can feel like you said earlier that they're being really disloyal to their family, especially if the pain that they experienced was from family members. Normalizing that they had really sad moments or they had these really traumatic experiences and that they're allowed to feel really whatever it is the emotion is, right? Really sad or really angry. That's a big one for me. When I'm talking about this, I have one client in particular who we're constantly going back and saying, it's okay. Like it's okay for you to still feel angry that this happened. You're not this abnormal person. This wasn't your fault. So I think just normalizing it, normalizing their experiences, and normalizing coming to therapy. That's a big one.
Yeah, that's all so good. I definitely agree with everything you said there. For a person that's new, they don't know what therapy looks like or how it's supposed to look like. I one thing I like to do is remind the client that they're in control, right? Even if they don't feel like it. If you don't feel comfortable discussing something, say pass. I will never force you to talk about something you don't want to or to do something you don't want to, right? And so they're in control. They don't have to talk about things, they don't have to answer questions, they can say pass. And so I think that can be really helpful too.
Yeah, and I think that's so beautiful because it's such a good reminder because they can feel so out of control when they're sharing something. They might feel they're oversharing or they might feel that shame. And I would say even I had a recent experience with a teen, and we brought her mom in, for the first session because she's a minor. But I also think when working with clinicians or clients of color, especially with minors, understanding that we're not just working with the minor, even if they're this overachieving teenager, we're working with the family system. And for me, what I have found helpful is bringing in the parents. And again, normalizing that this is okay, normalizing that kiddos aren't going to come in here and speak so ill of the family, that we're just processing what they're going through, that it's okay. Everybody's still going to be okay.
Yeah. That reminds me, I have this minor that I'm working with, and there were all these things that she wanted to do with therapy. Like, I want to take this much time off and blah, blah, blah. And the mom made a comment of like, oh, so we're just bending to the will of them, right? And I'm like, it was a great time to like re-clarify, right? And I said, so my role as her therapist, I'm not her teacher. So I'm not like, even though I'm teaching her things, there's not expectations. Like, you have to have homework done, you have to have this grade, you have to do this, right? I'm also not her mother. So I'm not gonna discipline her. And so yes, here in this room, she gets to make her decisions and we support that, right? As long as she's safe, as long as I'm safe, as long as she's not hurting herself or others or destroying property, she does get to make these decisions. And mom was like, oh, okay. So it was just a great time to refresh mom on what therapy is. But yeah, I totally agree. If I'm gonna work with minors or clients, or adolescent clients, parents need to be involved. They need to collaborate, or it's going to be really difficult to do the work.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Our hour is up. I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience. And I'm sure that a lot of the viewers are going to be so grateful for the information and for you giving us your experience. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I was really nervous, but you're right. This definitely felt just like a conversation you and I would have. And yeah, thanks for having me.